Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, when I watch Netflix, as so many people across this nation, across this world do, it seems there is a huge infatuation now with serial killers. Inside Evil's lair, serial killer fascination. And it seems that the general public cannot get enough of it, you know. There's at least 10 different shows that show on Ed Gein is on Netflix now. And the fascination with serial killers is beyond cult-like almost, you know. And we look at this man up on the screen, Jeffrey Dahmer, a real horrific character. Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker, and they didn't even do a separate show on him. But I've read that show, I followed it, I saw the Netflix special. Real horrific guy. Compare him to the devil. And of course, BTK, who has a very punchable face, just looking at his face up on the screen. And then this evil fat bastard, the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. And the latest to join this fraternity of serial killers is this man here who looks as evil as any of them, Rex Schumann, the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer. And then you have a man who is a little more attractive than most serial killers, but his soul is as black as anyone else's, Ted Bundy. And it's just unbelievable how many people are attracted to this. And again, we see Jeffrey Dahmer, who incidentally, folks, was murdered in prison. Prison justice, you know. And Richard Ramirez, who died of cancer in prison. And here's a little bit of a collage of serial killers. Manson, Berkowitz, to name a few. Just absolutely horrific. And would have been a new addition had he not been caught early in his career, is this evil man that we all know as Brian Koberger. And not a serial killer, a mass killer. Because according to the FBI, the definition of a serial killer is 2 separate incidents with time in between. So it's 2 or more incidents makes you a serial killer. Don't believe the Google definition. It's incorrect. The definition that we go with is, of course, the FBI definition. So it is amazing. Some names aren't just names. They're warnings. They're whispers of what humanity is capable of at its absolute worst. We're drawn to these stories not because we admire the men in them, but because we can't look away. It's a morbid curiosity that pulls us in, and need to understand the minds of monsters who look just like us. We want to know why they did what they did. And maybe most importantly, we want to learn the signs to protect ourselves. This fascination is exactly why we still talk about them, why their stories are told and retold in documentaries and podcasts, becoming a twisted part of our cultural landscape. So serial killers, the fascination is amazing, as is the fascination with true crime in itself, which we're glad you are fascinated, because that's what we do. We do true crime. So folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your cup of coffee, your glass of wine. Hold on to your thoughts. We're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
Joining me tonight to discuss this very, very interesting topic is, of course, retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney of law. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary. Welcome, Mike.
Bill, good evening. Good to see you. Welcome back.
And to add even more flavor to this show, we have retired NYPD Sergeant and straight out of Brooklyn. Welcome to the show, Detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the promotion. You called me Sergeant.
Oh, I thought I called you Detective. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, you can be a sergeant for tonight if you want.
I'll stay as a detective. I'm good.
No one's going to check on that one. Anyway, I want to ask you guys. I mean, when I watched the first episode yesterday of Edward Gein on Netflix, pretty disturbing show, and I think on Netflix there are at least 10 shows about serial killers, and then of course true crime, and there's hundreds of true crime stations, or I should say, or shows on Netflix. So it has garnered so much interest. And Mike, I want to address this to you first. What is it about serial killers that make people so attracted to what they do, so attracted to their lives, like this man you see up on the screen? What do you think it is, Mike?
Bill, I think that what they do goes beyond the pale, beyond anything that anyone would really comprehend themselves or see themselves doing. And to see someone engage in some so terrible, such tragic, violent occurrences, and then perhaps go back to a normal life. And then again, a few months later or a year later, do it all over again. And there's planning going on, and they're so savage, they're so bad, they're so incomprehensible. I think people are just fascinated to say, in an intellectual way, but an emotional way, I would like to understand how this horrific thing could happen. How could you do that to another person? How could you go about treating people that way? I want to learn about it. And on an emotional level, maybe it's one of those things where it's like watching a slasher movie if you're a kid. You keep looking at the screen, you close your eyes occasionally, you look through your fingers, covering your face, but there's something about it that you can't put it away. And so I think there's this fascination both on an emotional level, but also on an intellectual level, because of the strangeness of how these people live their lives and do what they do.
Very well thought out. Phil, what I wanted to ask you is, what are the similarities between even the serial killers that I put up on the screen, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, BTK, John Wayne Gacy, Rex Heuermann, Ted Bundy? They must have some similarities. I don't think they're all different. What are the similarities that you have noted, both as a detective and in your research in regards to serial killers?
Well, with regard to these serial killers, I think the obvious thing that is common amongst them is that they kill. They have a propensity to kill. They're psychopathic, and there's sexual components in a lot of these serial killer killings. So I think that's some of the similarities. And I think the obsession with people, humans are naturally curious about taboo subjects. So when there's a subject such as something happening out of the ordinary, like serial killing, multiple murders for sexual gratification, these spark interest in everyday people that don't engage in that type of behavior. I'll call them people that are normal. They're not psychotic. So with that component that people are naturally curious about, which is natural behavior, there is a certain thrill in learning about it safely away from it. So I think there's also a psychological component that has to do with a survival instinct. We want to learn about these people so that we can protect ourselves against them, protect our loved ones, protect our families. Now, me being in law enforcement and always, hyper vigilant with regard to security, perhaps that's my own opinion. But I think that generally people want to know about this, learn about it so that they can protect themselves from these monsters that walk amongst everyday people. And some of those people that you put up there, those serial killers, they were really just unbelievable stories. When you talk about Ted Bundy, that he was out of the norm of what we, think a serial killer is. He was charismatic. He was considered to be a handsome guy, and he acted in a way that wasn't of the norm of some of these other serial killers. So, when you think of a serial killer, you think of a monster. I mean, you look at Rex Uhrman. We talked about him. He's one of the most recent serial killers. He was described as an ogre. And when you have, Ted Bundy was many years ago, but this was like a college type guy, almost like a jock, handsome. He lured women into his
lair. He can use the word lair.
That's the word I was looking for. He would lure women into his lair, and he would use sometimes, he'd have a fake cast on his leg that he was injured or he was disabled in some way. So he would make them drop their guard, and that's how he would lure them and attack them and kill them. So there's definitely a definite sick component to this. And I think you put up one of those people earlier, Bill, and you said he has a very punchable face. I think it was John Wayne Gacy. And
no, it was BTK. He has
BTK. Okay.
Very
yeah.
face.
They're just, they kind of give you the creeps. They make your skin crawl when you even look at them.
Yeah. This is from November 7th, 1989, when Richard Ramirez was finally arrested.
Of Judge Tynan's courtroom here in downtown Los Angeles. The hearing, the final sentencing hearing for Richard Ramirez is now finally over. And as you said, the judge said he could find no mitigating circumstances. In other words, he could find no reason to not accept the jury's recommendation. That is, guilty on all counts and the death penalty in the gas chamber at San Quentin on all counts. Everybody got their say in this final hearing today. Some of the victims had a chance to speak, some of the families of the victims, and Richard Ramirez also got his chance to speak in court today. He walked into the courtroom very quietly, but then he said he wanted to address the judge, even though he thought it was a waste of time.
For the offenses of murder is charged counts 2, 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, 20, 24, 29, 30, 32, and 40 of the information which you previously knew on September 20, 1989 were found guilty. The jury having found the offenses of murder to be first degree, and the jury having returned findings of the special circumstances alleged in the information under California Penal Code Section 190.2A3, 190.2A17.3, 190.2A17.4, 190.2A17.6, and 190.2A17.7 were true. And the jury having previously, to wit, on October 4, 1989, found that the penalty shall be death. And this court having on November 7, 1989, denied your motion for new trial and application for modification of verdicts and findings imposing the death penalty, it is the order of this court. You shall suffer the death penalty for each of the 19 special circumstances found true. Said penalty be inflicted within the walls of the state prison in San Quentin, California, in the manner prescribed by law and at a time be fixed by this court in the warrant of execution. You are remanded to the care, custody, and control of the Sheriff of Los Angeles County to be by him delivered to the warden of the state penitentiary in San Quentin, California, within 10 days from the date hereof, in the usual course of his duties, for the execution of the sentence on the offenses of murder in the first degree contained in counts 2, 5, 8, 9, 11, 13, 20, 24, 29, 30, 32, and 40 of the information which you have been found guilty, and the 19 special circumstances having been found to be true, to be held by him.
You know, I just want to show you a little bit of Richard Ramirez. Turned out he never received the death penalty. He died of cancer in prison, which is a sad thing. I would have wanted the state to execute him. If you followed the Night Stalker at all, the crimes he committed were absolutely horrific. And when we think about 1989, it seems like we're in the world of Star Trek compared to 1989, right? The technology has just exploded. And the way we catch and apprehend and prosecute criminals has changed also. Someone like Richard Ramirez couldn't do what he did today because he would be caught way too quickly. He wouldn't become a serial killer with 15 or 16 kills. He would get caught early on, and he did some very sloppy things because criminals didn't have to worry about DNA. They didn't have to worry about ring cameras. They didn't have to worry about body-worn video. They didn't have to worry about DNA. They didn't have to worry about investigative genetic genealogy. So serial killers were much more prolific 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years ago. Now, with the technology we have, hopefully the word serial killer will be a thing of the past. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Bill, just think about it. In 1989, England had DNA technology, and they had their first prosecutions, and just recently at that point, and they were successful. It hadn't been yet used, I don't think, in a court of law in New York. And I think you even said it wasn't until like 1991 or something like that that it was first used in New York City and in New York State courtroom. So you didn't have that. They didn't think of that. All they thought really about was maybe a fingerprint, because that had been around for a century. So they thought about fingerprints. They didn't think about DNA. That really wasn't on anybody's radar at that time. And then you also have the cell phone technology. 1989, I don't think anybody had cell phones at that point. Yeah, no one had cell phones at that point. It wasn't until like mid to late 90s that you had cell phones. And even then, the technology that they had was very different. Now we have geofencing and other ways to figure out what phones carried in someone's pocket may have gone through the crime scene. So you can go back and look at that. But it's really difficult to at that point, as you said, ring cameras, body worn cameras. You know, there's cameras everywhere in many cities, especially downtown areas. So therefore, you have all of that sort of information that could help police figure out and track down a serial killer on the run. But back then, they didn't have anything like that, and so therefore, killers could get away, and they could be somewhat sloppy. And even if some of their blood was found at the scene, you didn't have the IgG, so therefore they didn't have to worry about it. But you're right, serial killers today, like Koberger, he was a budding serial killer. Obviously, if he had gotten away with it, just like Dennis Rader, his hero, he may have killed a couple of months later or a year or two later when he felt like it, when he felt like he wanted to do it. But at this point, he had his first homicides, and then that was it. He was caught very quickly. So therefore, the serial killer will actually have a kill, but after that first kill, if there's any sort of evidence, they could use it, and with IgG and other things, to cut that serial killer streak short till it's only one homicide or maybe two, and that's it.
Absolutely. This is Banfield on News Nation talking about John Wayne Gacy.
That I fixate on, don't know why, maybe it's because I hate clowns, is John Wayne Gacy. So tonight, a full special on John Wayne Gacy, because until recently, we only knew what the news told us, right? We didn't know a whole lot more. Yeah, there were some books written and all the rest. But then came the tapes. As it turned out, not unusual for a killer to talk and talk and talk to his lawyer, because that's all privileged stuff. You can tell your lawyer anything leading up to trial, and that lawyer cannot tell me, cannot tell prosecutors, cannot tell the public. But then Gacy died, and those tapes were still in existence, and that lawyer gave them to his son, who is also a lawyer and who has kept them in a vault. Bob Motta Sr. did the representation. Bob Motta Jr. now has the tapes and a podcast, and he's sharing the voice of a monster. It is rare that we get to hear a serial killer like this admitting to what he's doing, talking about hiding bodies. And look at the crowds back then, right? I mean, yes, it was the 80s, but my God, this was such a story. 33 young men and boys that we know of. The count is suspected to be higher, much higher. And not just that he killed them, he buried most of them in his cellar. In his cellar. Some of them out on the property. But these were innocent people. They just vanished and died in the most horrific way. he would torture them, handcuff them, and keep them alive for a long time while raping them before finally murdering them. And we get some insight tonight on how he did it, because one of the guys survived and never told his story. For decades and decades, never told his story.
So that to me is very disturbing, And I mean, I don't think, look, I've seen the most heinous things a human being could see, in my police career, my last 10 years in Manhattan North Homicide. And then I worked in 2-3 in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem. Saw a lot of violence over my police career. And that is one of the things I get a little bit disturbed with also, even though this is our job doing this podcast. I don't think you can explain to people who haven't seen the level of violence that we've seen in real life. I don't think you can really explain the reality to them, what it feels like to walk into a crime scene, what it feels like to walk through blood, what it feels like to see blood spatter on walls, what it feels like to see a blunt object with bone and brain matter on it, what it feels like to see multiple dead bodies inside a location. You can't tell the story using video. When you've seen it live, everything we see that the news presents or that we see people watching on News Nation or CNN or whatever it is, or even these podcasts, cannot equal the reality of real violence. Phil, your thoughts?
My thoughts are this. I think you kind of summed it up pretty good, Billy. I think there's no other better feeling for a detective than standing in a crime scene over a dead body with an empty notebook. And at some point in the future, whether it be a day, a week, a month, or a year, you now have the person responsible for that horrific crime scene, that murder, and they're giving you a confession. To me, that was actually a euphoric feeling, because you know that you started out with nothing. You had an empty notebook at a crime scene, and now a tremendous investigation has taken place, and you've zeroed in on a suspect, and now you have that suspect confessing to the murder. That is tops for a detective investigator. With regard to these serial killers, they're so out of the ordinary, and I think that that's the component that draws people into the obsession with it, that taboo subject that I mentioned before. These people do things that, when you talk about a crime scene, sometimes it could be a bar fight or a drug hit or something like that. Not that those things are okay, but those things are expected. If you're in the world of crime and you're dealing drugs and there's murders, it's kind of expected. But these things, they prey on innocent people. These are people that walk through everyday society undetected, and they target and they stalk, and then they commit whatever heinous act it is that leads to the murder. And it's very scary to think about. So I think that that's why there's such an obsession with it. And then lately we had this Luigi Mangione that who really wasn't a serial killer, but he was very famous for killing the CEO of United Healthcare. And because he was what was determined to be as a handsome young man, he has a fan base. And I think that that's really kind of saying something about society today. But that's a whole other topic for another day. But with regard to what you just said, Bill, I think, as you said, you can't understand it till you've been in a crime scene, till you've seen it. And I always talk about the World Trade Center. It was one thing to see it on television on a news program, but when you were there and you had the smell and you had the 110-story, 210-story buildings on the floor in front of you, it was just quite different to experience.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime, you're in the right place. Just hit that subscribe button if you want to contribute to us financially. We have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels. And you can become a member of the Police Off the Cuff YouTube channel. All you have to do is subscribe. And now a word from our sponsor. FanDuel's got an offer you don't want to miss this NFL season. New customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, bet $5, and if it wins, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. You can build parlays, bet player props, ride the live lines, whatever your style. FanDuel has you covered. The NFL season is here. The only question is, are you ready to play? You must be 21 years or older and present in select states for Kansas and affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in DC, Kentucky, or Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbookfanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NEW YORK or text HOPE New York in New York. You know, folks, this is the latest, of course, who joined the fraternity of serial killers. Of course, this is Rex Heuermann.
That walks among us, a predator that ruined families.
It took nearly 13 years.
Rex, did you do it?
To track down the accused Gilgo Beach serial killer.
We executed over 300 subpoenas, search warrants.
The amount of evidence that we're getting is massive.
A married father of two, living in the house he grew up in.
You never know who's living on your block.
Now he's tied to multiple murders.
They're human beings. And I know Amber was so much more, and I miss her terribly.
This is a Pix 11 news special. Hunt the Gilgo Beach serial killer.
I'm Mary Murphy on Gilgo Beach, where a serial killer investigation was launched more than a dozen years ago. 4 dead women who came to be known as the Gilgo Four were discovered here in the brush off Ocean Parkway in December 2010. Now police say they finally found the murderer.
He was living a double life. He had a wife, he had 2 kids, nice job as an architect.
And Rex Heuermann, 59, probably never expected to be surrounded by cops in Midtown as he left work on a Thursday evening.
Rex, did you do it?
Still wearing the same khakis, the towering suspect was accused of being the Gilgo Beach, Long Island serial killer known as Lisk, who eluded law enforcement for more than a dozen years.
You were aware that he was patronizing other sex workers?
It certainly appeared as though he was, yes.
While investigators in white Tyvek suits immediately descended on Heuermann's lifelong home in Massapequa Park, armed with search warrants, the suspect was initially charged with murdering 3 of the Gilgo Four, Megan Waterman, Melissa Barthelemy, and Amber Costello, all petite online escorts who were discovered dead in 2010 with another escort, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, in the brush off Ocean Parkway.
The only thing I can tell you that he did say as he was in tears was, "I didn't do this."
3 of the sex workers were bound in burlap, and Heuermann was named the prime suspect in the murder of the 4th, Brainerd Barnes. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Deese consulted on the case of serial killer Joel Rifkin, another Long Island resident, and spoke to us about Heuermann's arrest.
The most common sexual motive for serial killings is sexual sadism. Becoming the god to that victim is the offender's primal goal.
The architect's neighbors on First Avenue in Massapequa Park were stunned that the hulking Heuermann hid the alleged crimes for so long. A map showing Wantagh Parkway near his home reveals how easily he could have driven to Ocean Parkway, close to the Jones Beach Exchange.
He grew up there as a kid with his parents.
Many thought that Heuermann's house was an eyesore. Detectives said they found hundreds of guns locked in a vault in the house, and fairly soon they were searching storage facilities nearby.
Are there body parts or things that we need to take a look at? Are there trophies of some of the victims that unfortunately, that he stored in that location.
The crucial break in the case had come last year from a new interview with Amber Costello's roommate and pimp, who said that John had come to their house in Babylon on September 1st, 2010, the day before she vanished, and the client, described as ogre-like, was driving a green Chevy Avalanche.
6 weeks later, on March 14th, 2022, the name Rex Heuermann was first mentioned as a suspect in the Gilgo case.
So we all know that case so very well. And right now there's been some movement in that his attorney, I believe is Robert Brown, chose to try to sever all. There's 7 cases that Rex Heuermann is being charged with, 7 individual murders. The attorney, Robert Brown, was trying to get a separate trial for each and every victim. The judge just a couple of days ago said, no good. This is going to
That was
be
his
one.
retirement package, Bill. Seven trials?
Right.
You kidding?
That's what he wanted. Yeah, he
Yeah.
wanted 7 separate trials, and
Yeah.
the judge said, no good. They're all going to be tried at once, which makes sense. Could you imagine 7? What would that take? About 10 years? 7
Probably.
separate trials? But, one of the things we're also finding out about Rex Heuermann is that his first murder that has been documented went back to 1993. Also a sex worker named Sandra Castilla, whose body was found out near Southampton, Long Island. And mitochondrial DNA, which the advances in DNA technology was able to identify a hair that belonged to Rex Heuermann on Sandra Castilla's back. So that goes back to 1993. I think both Phil, Mike, and I have all agreed that we can't even imagine how many bodies can be attributed to Rex Heuermann. And all that we can hope for is that when he gets convicted, because I am almost positive he will get convicted, that perhaps after that, he will cooperate and come clean with how many murders he's committed across this country, and perhaps even in Iceland, where his wife is from, where he had been known to go to also. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, and don't forget South Carolina, because he did own property down in South Carolina, and I think his brother is down in South Carolina. So there's probably the Carolina State Police, Criminal Investigation Bureau is looking into that also. But yeah, it makes sense to put this all in one trial on the theory that this is just a continuation of one long crime spree that's spread out over a number of years. There's no reason to have anything less than one trial. So that is terrific for the taxpayers. Makes it so much better for the prosecution, makes it much more difficult for his attorney to defend. So that's a really good thing. But yeah, we may never know. There might be 30 altogether, there might be 15. I doubt that all of the girls that he's been charged with killing are the sum total. I'm sure there's got to be probably another half dozen or dozen at least.
I think absolutely. Someone in the chat said that Rex Heuermann will never cooperate. Well, when he's convicted of 7 murders and they start taking privileges from him, or they put him in isolation, and they said, Rex, how would you like to have a bigger room? How would you like to have a bigger TV? How would you like to have better food? That's all they have to offer, because there's no death penalty in New York State. So he may come clean after the fact. He's not going to come clean now. He's got an attorney, and they got him for 7 murders. I mean, when his attorney, Robert Brown, told that story, Rex had tears in his eyes and said, I didn't do this. I almost laughed out loud. The amount of evidence against Rex Heuermann is unbelievable. Phil.
Yeah, I think the tears in his eyes could have been he was thinking about the prospects of spending the rest of his life inside of a jail cell. And you're right, Bill. At some point, listen, there's going to be a very long trial here, because you're going to have 7 different crime scenes, 7 different medical experts that talk about the different bodies. You're going to talk about the evidence that's recovered from each of these 7 crime scenes. So this is going to be a long trial. This is not going to be something that's going to take a week or two. And to spread it out over 7 different trials, that's just ridiculous. But at the end, if he's convicted, he's in jail, he's sentenced, he goes to, they're going to try and give him a maximum security prison and all of that. And then at some point, there's going to be the hope that maybe he's going to want to have what you said. Maybe he's going to want to have better visitation or a better cell or something that's not, 23 hours a day in lockdown. And that's when perhaps there could be some cooperation. And Mike, I'm going to agree with you. I think that based on the longevity of this whole thing, going back to the mid 90s, and we know that there's probably 7 that he's being charged with, perhaps involved in as many as 13 or 14. There's probably others that we just don't know about that weren't linked to this. He could have been doing things, like you said, down in South Carolina or other areas, maybe the dumping ground where he was, dumping the bodies over in Gilgo. He felt maybe that was may have been the second place, maybe not have been the first place that he was dumping bodies. So there could be a long trail, and I would hope that we could possibly, get to the bottom of that. And again, I'm sure the investigators would be looking into people that have been reported missing and never found. And obviously, if there's homicides where they're Jane Doe or John Doe, they'd be looking into those. So there's always hope that down the line they could put together, if there were other victims of Rex Heuermann.
He was charming and handsome law student, a rising political star. He was the quiet guy from next door, the one whose shyness you might have mistaken for kindness. He was the life of the party, a friendly local businessman who dressed up as a clown for kids' charity events. And they were all hiding the same dark secret. They were serial killers. Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy. These weren't monsters from a fairy tale. They were men who walked among us, hiding in plain sight. So what were the unique psychological hooks that made their legacies so terrifyingly unforgettable? Let's dissect the killers we still can't ignore. The story of Ted Bundy is the ultimate chilling example of a wolf in sheep's clothing. His psychological hook was his complete mastery of manipulation. He turned his charm and good looks into a weapon, playing on society's instinct to trust a handsome, well-spoken man. Bundy didn't look like a monster. He looked like the all-American guy next door, and he used that to his deadly advantage. His intelligence and charisma weren't just personality traits. They were tools he sharpened to hunt people. His most infamous trick was faking an injury. He'd put his arm in a sling or use crutches, making himself look vulnerable as he asked for help carrying books to his Volkswagen Beetle. It was a calculated performance designed to disarm his victims by preying on their kindness. Woman who would have been on high alert around a menacing figure felt sympathy for the handsome, struggling student. The moment they leaned in to help, the mask dropped. He would overpower them, and the charming man would reveal the monster beneath. And that is what makes Bundy's legacy so potent. The horror of an enemy who looks and acts just like a friend. He shattered the illusion that we can judge evil by its cover. His story is a terrifying reminder that the most dangerous predators are often the ones we'd never suspect. I would think that all serial killers have a bit of Ted Bundy in them. The lies, the deceit, the fooling people, the just trying to get over on people by using whatever means necessary. And we go back to Rex Heuermann. He targeted a specific type of woman, and he was looking for sex workers. The other thing was he targeted women who were smaller. Believe it or not, this 6'4", 6'6", nearly 300-pound ogre was afraid of women being too big or too strong. So he would actually seek out smaller women. That's a little bit disgusting, isn't it? When you think of this 6'4", 6'6", 300-pound junior elephant here, right? It's like that's who he was looking at. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, you're right. They all have certain things in common. One of them is being manipulative and getting over on people. Remember, they don't have a conscience like you and I do. They are very transactional relationships. The relationships don't mean anything. Their relationships with people are there only to get them what they want and nothing further. they can really detach themselves from any sort of feeling of remorse for what they do, because it's all about them and no one else. You could look at Dennis Rader, the guy with the mustache, the BTK killer. He was a local compliance officer. I think it was in Wichita, Kansas. He wasn't handsome. He wasn't overly articulate. He just blended in with the community because people saw him every single day. He had 2 children and a wife, and he did sports with his kids and Boy Scouts with his kids. And that was his shtick, to just drive around. And since it was so commonplace to see him, he's ubiquitous. Nobody notices him, but he would start watching certain people and then come to a decision about who he wanted to kill, who was going to be his next target. And then he worked on that. Ted Bundy had his shtick. He used his glibness, his handsomeness. He was very forthcoming, very bubbly. He had a really good personality. And then you have, say, John Wayne Gacy, who was a very tall man, but he had that clown image where he'd dress up and he'd be Pogo the Clown. They all had their own shtick, but in the end, what they were trying to do was to get over on people, win over their confidence until the point where they were vulnerable to attack. And that's what they did. And they left a trail of bodies. And so therefore, they do have a lot in common. Some of them, may have killed like maybe Ramirez. Maybe he was more psychotic or something. But these people were all sociopathic. They were very, very manipulative. Many of them, like say John Wayne Gacy, planned well, although it seems strange to put the body in your own basement. But Bundy and BTK killer, they got away with it for quite a while because they were actually pretty organized. And the people they preyed on people who didn't seem to have a lot of familial connections to notice that they were gone, that sort of thing. So therefore, they do have, although they're kind of what they call the banality of evil. They all, as handsome as one might be, or one may not be as handsome, but they all look like regular, normal people. Human, 6'6", that's very different. But for the most part, he's very menacing, just looking at the guy. But somebody who's 5'10" or 5'11", who is slim, or in the case of like BTK, he just looks like a 45, 50-year-old married man. He could frown in that picture. He's just an ordinary guy working in a community. There's Ramirez, but you've got these guys. They all are doing their thing, and at the end of the day, what they want is they want to kill. They want to feel like they're in charge. That psychosexual component of being in charge of someone, deciding when and how they are going to die. That is ultimate control over another human being. And that really turned them on. Scary, but it really turned them on.
Well, Mike, when we were talking before, we were watching the video from on Rex Heuermann, and the one psychiatrist said the one commonality for a lot of serial killers is psychosexual sadism.
Yeah.
And that was 100% true with Rex Heuermann. And I would imagine with some of these other individuals, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, just an out and out evil. I mean, an evil, psychotic sadist. He was all of those things. Dennis Rader, just, very, as I said earlier, very punchable face. And then the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy. And absolutely Rex Heuermann. Look at that face. If you saw that guy, it used to be a joke when Reagan was president. They would ask, would you buy a used car from this man?
Right.
That's my question. Would you buy a used car from that man? I don't think so. Just terrifying. But one of the things that we sort of can look forward to in this day and age is the fact that technology has moved much faster than the criminal mind has. And the ways that the police and science has to catch these individuals is an amazing thing to behold right now. This is News Nation.
Forensic genetic genealogy. Let's make it sound like it makes more sense. They identify a suspect from DNA in a public database, like those ancestry sites that so many people think are cool, that tens of millions of people have used worldwide to find their family. That's how Brian Kohberger was named as a suspect in Idaho. That's how the Golden State Killer was caught. The problem is, it's pricey. Our Stephanie Haynes has more on this story. And obviously, Stephanie, if it's so simple, why not spend the money? Get these killers off the street.
Yeah, Adrian, good morning. It's simple because they don't have the money. These tests are reportedly thousands of dollars, and that is very expensive for anyone or any one single local police department. And so giving more access to funding will help these law enforcement agencies be able to use this method. And there are some concerns about privacy, but investigators say this could be huge for so many families who have been waiting decades just to get an answer.
Solving a cold case takes time and money. So Texas Senator John Cornyn wants to make it a little easier. He's introducing a bill that would provide federal grant money to help law enforcement pay for forensic genetic genealogy testing.
And quite frankly, that's where this money needs to be.
The government already can check your DNA if you are arrested for certain offenses. That all goes into a system called CODIS. And that way investigators can check that for potential suspects using crime scene data. But when there's no match, they now can turn to forensic genealogy, ancestry sites where you submit your DNA to learn about your lineage.
The drawback, though, is that individuals who just wanted to know their lineage, now that information could possibly lead to one of their relatives being implicated.
Such is the case of Idaho murder suspect Brian Kohberger from DNA left at the scene. The method also helped nab the Golden State Killer. Some sites require a court order to give up the data to police, and others allow you, the consumer, to opt out. Besides privacy concerns, attorneys say DNA evidence can be challenged in court.
It doesn't tell you when, it doesn't tell you how, it doesn't tell you motive. Anytime a prosecutor uses DNA, it's a supplement to other tools, and it's usually not actually the best tool.
Investigators say it's a balance.
Being able to solve horrific crimes and murders, being able to protect the public from murderers and sexual assaulters, and then to also exonerate those who are currently incarcerated, perhaps that should not be. When you look at that balance, it seems like an easy question.
And according to a recent report from the publication Engineering and Technology, there have been more than 400 cases nationwide that have been solved this way. Marky, Adrian.
I think that people are probably watching at home and thinking we're spending billions of dollars on defense in Ukraine and around the world. We can afford to support our law enforcement agencies with this technology if it helps to get killers, serial killers off the streets. Thank you, Stephanie.
So very interesting. But, you know, and when we hear about this, we being the police knew about this years ago. There were thousands, literally 100,000s of DNA kits, sexual offense evidence kits sitting on warehouse shelves that were never tested because the state didn't have the money to do so. So unless there was a perpetrator in custody being charged with the crime, they would never test the kit. And then at some point, I think they got the money, and they needed millions and millions of dollars. But just think of that as a citizen, that a crime committed against you or one of your loved ones, an evidence kit is sitting on a shelf in some warehouse, drawing dust, and they have the technology to identify the perp, and they didn't do it because of money, because there's no tax dollars to pay for it. Phil.
Yeah, Billy, that just reminds me of a case recently where I can't think of the victim's name, but there was a homicide, and his DNA was sitting on a shelf, just like you said, for another rape case, and it just never matched up. And he was eventually caught.
That was that jogger who was out early in the morning.
Yes,
I
think she had 5 children, if I'm not mistaken. I can't think of a name offhand, but I know we covered the case.
She was jogging. It was in another state. It was right near off a college campus property.
Yeah,
the guy actually had stalked her.
Exactly.
And he was out on parole for another murder. He'd committed another sex crime, and the kit was sitting on a shelf and was never tested.
Yep.
And had they tested the kit, he would have been in prison and wouldn't have been able to murder this woman. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, I remember in the 4-6 in the Bronx years ago, you had a rape evidence kit, and you'd bring back to the precinct, and then instead of taking it now to the hospital or someplace else or a property clerk's office to refrigerate it, no, it just sat on the shelf in the property locker until somebody decided to bring it to the property clerk's office. There was no thought of testing it. Maybe the protocol wasn't in place because we didn't have the money, or like you said, if there was an arrest made, at the scene or shortly thereafter, yeah, maybe they would have done it. Or under some other circumstances, maybe an unusual crime pattern where there was going to be more attention paid and more work done, more money spent. But yeah, I saw this for a decade at least on patrol in the 4-6. It was just a waste of valuable evidence that went nowhere. And you just think about the damage done and the perps that may have been caught and prosecuted. You shake your head because that's the way it was,
Somebody put in the chat, Billy, it was Rachel Morin that was.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
It
wasn't Rachel Morin. It was a woman who was actually, she was from a billionaire family. I can't think of her name. She had blonde hair. She used to run. She worked at a daycare center. She would run every morning at like 4:30, 4:45 in the morning by this university. And this guy pulled a gun on her and forced her into his car. And she fought so hard for his life, he shot and killed her right on the scene.
Right.
And it was absolutely a horrific case. And when we found that out, that they had a case on this guy that sat on the shelf and was never tested, it was just inexcusable for the state.
That's terrible, I think.
Folks, we try to teach in this podcast also. And when we talk about CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System that is run by the FBI, there's two types or two categories of DNA, I should say. One is forensic DNA, and that is DNA found in crime scenes that has yet to be identified. The other DNA is offender DNA, which is obviously identified DNA that goes into CODIS that'll show either future crimes or crimes perhaps that this defendant has already committed. And the FBI runs that. But it's just amazing to think that why are police departments taking evidence if they're not going to test it? And I don't know, this could be true across the country, because do little police departments, little tiny police departments have the money, have thousands of dollars to test these DNA kits? Right. They're not going to do it. And can we blame them? There's no money to do it. They're not getting the money from this. That money should come from the state, since it is a state issue. It's a state problem. Some little town, in Idaho or Wyoming or something, they're not going to have the money to do this.
How about the federal government? The federal government could pick up the bill on something like that. I mean, the government is in place to keep us safe, basically. So how about, I think passing a bill where DNA testing could be paid for by the federal government. And, the way things go with Donald Trump, he'll probably find a less expensive way to do it, get a contract with a company that'll do it throughout the whole nation. But it's not right if there is evidence that's taken at a crime scene or a rape victim, and then it's not tested. That's just in 2025. That's unacceptable in my opinion.
It could have saved that woman's life.
Absolutely.
And it didn't, because they didn't do it. This is a CNN report on the BTK killer.
Ago, he was known as BTK, a name he gave himself, short for bind, torture, kill. He is currently serving life sentences at a maximum security facility in Kansas. And now there is new evidence that may connect the infamous BTK serial killer to additional murders. Arjun Casares spoke to the killer's daughter and got exclusive access to some of his diary entries and drawings.
She was a very full of life, typical teenager.
This is Cynthia Dawn Kinney, a 16-year-old cheerleader who vanished from an Oklahoma laundromat in 1976. The self-proclaimed BTK serial killer is now the prime suspect. In her case, and several other unsolved homicides spanning 3 states. It was parts of this journal belonging to BTK, real name Dennis Rader, shared exclusively with CNN, that prompted law enforcement in Oklahoma to act. Shortly after Kenny's disappearance, the sheriff's office received an anonymous call.
That male caller informed them that she was located in an old barn.
No evidence that lead was ever looked into. Her body was never found. But authorities are now looking at this journal entry by Rader. Bad wash day.
He marked that in 1976, he had murdered someone from a laundromat.
For the first time, law enforcement is revealing detailed drawings made by Rader, showing young girls tied and bound in barns.
Our hope was to get these drawings out in hopes that someone will recognize these barns.
As investigators combed through Rader's old files for clues that could link him to Kinney's murder and several others, an unexpected volunteer stepped forward. His daughter, Carrie Rawson.
If he's innocent on these, I will defend him. If he is guilty, I will nail him to the wall.
Working with authorities, Rawson visited her father in prison for the first time in 18 years.
He's in a wheelchair. He has no teeth left. And he went from this like vivacious man that was hiking with me right before he was arrested to like an elderly man.
Did he confess to you?
No, he did not.
Rader has been in prison since 2005 after pleading guilty to 10 counts of murder. He has not confessed to any additional crimes. But just last week, authorities heard this during one of his prison calls.
He said there might still be some things in some old barns.
This new investigation led authorities to dig up the area around Rader's former family home just last week in Kansas. The result, more potential evidence discovered, a well-constructed hiding hole.
What did you find in the hole that you can tell us?
Personal type items. You know, we found items that could have been used for binding people. We found some different remains from materials, you know, carpet fibers.
John, I was also told that in that hole they found what are called trophies, items that definitely belong, they say, to females. Now, the next step is that all of these items need to be forensically tested. They need to see if there's any relevancy to these brand new items just discovered to these unsolved cases. This hole was just found last week, John, because of Osage County, Oklahoma. And now Osage is saying that all of these unsolved homicides that they're looking at, they know what the girls were last seen with, last wearing. They have seen Polaroids that Rader made that are part of that journal that have him even wearing some items from his victims. They believe there are some matches of these unsolved victims to items. They want the FBI, they want the Kansas Bureau of Investigation to see if they have those items. So forensics is going to be the key to this.
Stunning new details, I imagine.
So, you know, one of the disturbing things about that, well, there's many disturbing things about it, but we had retired FBI agent Jim Clemente on our show, who incidentally, 12 years before Rex Heuermann was arrested, Jim Clemente wrote a profile that was featured in the New York Times that basically identified Rex Heuermann without naming him by name, identified all the traits that the Gilgo Beach serial killer would have. And it was uncanny. It was unbelievable. But it was somewhat ignored. It was, you know, just, what do they know? You know, it wasn't used. But one of the things he said is like, these serial killers, what they have in mind is they love the notoriety. They love their name being out there. They love their picture being out there. So he was really upset on our show when people kept wanting to mention Brian Kohberger's name, even though he wasn't a serial killer. He was a mass killer, and he was also headed to becoming a serial killer had he not been caught. Mike.
Yeah, we take a look at the Rader case. He was off the radar for a number of years, and he seemed like he was forgotten about. He wasn't too happy about it. So he actually started writing letters to the police department and they traced back where the letter had been, the computer that the letter had been typed from. And so they realized that was the big clue for them, because they realized the letter was written on a computer.
I think it was a floppy disk, Mike.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, the floppy disk. And it was traced back to a church that he attended. And so that's how they ended up figuring out who it was. But yeah, the notoriety, they love the play with people. We saw this as far back as you want to talk about Jack the Ripper, where there was actually several notes written to the local newspaper, introducing himself and saying, you can't catch me kind of deal. They want to feel like they're smarter than everybody else. I am sure that if you talk about, Koberger, if he'd gotten away with it, somewhere along the line, he might have dropped a hint to a newspaper or something, because they just want to always feel like they're in control. They want to control the narrative even after the crimes are committed. They want to tease the police, make the police look like fools. And this, when you're looking at this special on Raider, the story, you realize some of the things that were missed about a woman being abducted, at a particular laundromat, and all the clues that were missed. And that's sad, but they do crave in some ways credit. They want the credit. They don't want to do the crime, and they don't want to be caught, but they want to have some sort of notoriety attached to the homicides that they commit.
I wanted to mention also some of the things that we look at today in 2025 that weren't available 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Video is everywhere, as we've discussed, and which solves a lot of cases, not just serial killers, robberies, rapes, assaults. Video is everywhere in this world, and not just video that's mounted on buildings, but cell phone video, which we've seen solve terrorist attacks like the Boston Marathon bombing, largely solved by the crowd using their cell phones and turning over their videos to the FBI. So body-worn video by police. Many police departments now have body-worn video, facial recognition. Huge technology, not yet perfected, but an amazing technology. We all have spoken about DNA technology, investigative genetic genealogy. There's something called, and has nothing to do here with serial killers, but it can be involved in other investigations, something called Shot Spotter, that can really pinpoint the location where gunshots come from, right to feet from where the gun was, which is just incredible. Partnerships, of course, with local, federal police departments and exchanging information. That was a weakness by the federal law enforcement agencies, specifically targeted after 9/11. The FBI was accused of not sharing information with police, and they're famous for that. And local police get quite pissed off when the FBI doesn't share information, and everything to the FBI is top secret. But you know something, in the Boston Marathon bombing, a police officer may have been killed because the FBI didn't share the identities of the two Boston Marathon bombers, Tamerlan and Zokard Tsarnaev. They were identified, and the FBI secret squirreled it and wouldn't put it out there. And the Boston police chief, his name was Ed Davis, went to blows with them. No, put it out there, put it out there. And he was overruled by the feds, by some politician, overruled them. And as I'm not going to say as a direct result, but a possibility, that campus police officer may have never been killed had they, because it would have made the Tsarnaev brothers go underground or at least get the hell out of there. But they stayed there and they committed more crimes. And guess where they were heading? Times Square. They were heading to New York City.
That's right.
Times Square. But the Watertown police in Massachusetts banged it out with those two, killed the older brother and wounded the younger brother. And they saved the lives of many, many people. That little small town police department, the Watertown police. John McClellan, if you're listening, we had him on the show years ago.
Yes.
You're a hero. You're an amazing hero. He was banging it out with him and other compadres from his police department. The Zarnaev brothers were throwing bombs at the radio cars, improvised explosive devices. And these guys banged it out with these two, and they were outgunned. The Zarnaevs had AR-15s, and the police officers were using their 9s, and some of them ran out of ammo. The gunfight went on for so long. So just to get back to some of the other technology, partnerships with jails and prisons, very important. The information and investigations we get from jails and prison. Drones, we need to go over drones, how important drones are now. Unbelievable. One of the things I loved about drones is not even a law enforcement application, but a life-saving application in regards to people that are drowning in the ocean. What better way to drop a life preserver to someone than a drone? That's not risking anyone else's life. Get it out there so fast and drop it right on the victim. Boom. Now you can get out there. You can take your time getting out there because they have a life preserver that's going to keep them above the water. So drones are amazing, and they're amazing for surveillance. They're amazing for all kinds of different police applications. Ring cameras. How many people out there listening to me right now have a Ring camera on their house?
I have one.
Yeah, I think everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone. Most really smart people do, though, because it's pretty important. Phone cameras we discussed, license plate readers, unbelievable. In New York City, they have caught terrorists using license plate readers. They have caught fugitives using license plate readers. Unbelievable. So the technology we have, Big Brother is always watching. Phil.
Yes, Billy. And you brought up the cell phone. The cell phone was intricate in identifying the movements of Brian Koberger, who wasn't actually a serial killer yet, but we know he was headed in that direction. Rex Human, same thing. The cell phone actually pinpointed the location where they believed that the killer had lived. And then once they put the pieces together, so this cell phone technology, which has really advanced over the last 10, 15 years, very, very important in investigation and in law enforcement technique that the law enforcement officers use. The information that they garner from these cell phones is just tremendous. One thing I wanted to talk about real quick, Simi Sharp earlier in the chat put, what is one of the things that we think is common with almost all of the serial killers? Now, Bill and Mike went over a lot of the things, but I think there was one thing we missed: control, control, control. Yeah. These killers want control over their victims. And the other thing is they all seem to lead a double life. When you look at BTK, he had he was a scout leader, church president. He was described as being a dad by day and a sadistic killer by night. Think about that. Rex Human was a very successful architect. So all of these people, when you go back to Bundy, he had his life. They lead double lives. And again, the killing is about control, 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 whether it be sexually motivated or just the fact that they want to kill. It's all about control. So that's some of the things that I think are very common with regard to serial killers. And again, Bill, you brought up so much of the technology. There just seems to be cameras everywhere. When you talked about terrorists being captured in New York City, they had the location that they came into New York City, came into Manhattan on when they committed a serial terrorist attack, and they knew the exact movements from all the plate readers and the cameras, the traffic cameras, so they were able to put together the exact route taken by the terrorists. So with that technology, I think is so helpful in today's world. If there are other psychotic serial killers out there, perhaps their killing sprees will be much shorter based on the fact of all the technology that's out there today.
We mentioned Ring cameras, and just see if this looks familiar to you guys.
Authorities say shows confessed killer Brian Koberger driving around the house where minutes later he would murder 4 University of Idaho students. His white Hyundai Elantra seen circling the neighborhood several times, making 3 passes by that King Road home between 3:30 and 3:58 a.m., minutes before investigators say he entered the home. Around 4:17 a.m., you hear what sounds like a voice, followed by a loud thud. Then a dog can be heard barking. Investigators say that was a prominent sound.
The dog barking is probably the most consistent noise on that video.
The car seen leaving at a high rate of speed around 4:20 a.m., careening around the street. He tried to hide his movements by disabling his Wi-Fi and manually powering down his phone, according to the digital forensic experts who analyzed his devices. But less than 2 hours later, he was calling his parents, 11 interactions with them the day of the murders. The experts also saying they found evidence of disturbing search history on Kohberger's devices weeks after the murders, including Christmas night.
Bryan Kohberger spent a majority of his night on Christmas doing a deep dive on serial killers.
I mean, it was ridiculous details about all of these different serial killers. And he just clicked one after the other after the other.
And while forensic evidence revealed no direct link to the victims, they do say that he used Google Maps to search for the Mad Greek. That's the restaurant where both Mogan and Kernodle work.
So, again, we spoke about the technology that becomes part of all investigations these days. There you have it. A Ring camera was what caught Bryan Kohberger's white Hyundai Elantra driving around right after, before and after the murder. And also we have to realize there was 23 recons to 1122 King Road. Technology, again, technology, digital technology enabled law enforcement to track him. And even after the fact, in Rex Schuman's case, I was amazed by this. They got search warrants for his computer. They didn't need to get his computer. They searched his computer remotely. How amazing is that?
That's amazing.
That's pretty damn amazing. And they found out evidence on that computer that helped to give them the probable cause for the arrest. There was other evidence, but you can't have enough evidence. When they talk about investigative genetic genealogy, C.C. Moore says it should never be used as probable cause. It should be used as one piece of evidence that helps you to develop probable cause to make an arrest and then build a case against the defendant. So technological advances in regards to these serial killers is just unbelievable. I'd just like to ask the chat, how many people in the chat are extremely enamored with serial killers, more so than any other type of crime that we've covered on this channel? If you're totally enamored with serial killers, put a 1 in the chat. If you're not, if you're just mildly interested, put a 2. I'm just interested to hear from our audience how many people are extremely enamored with serial killers, because it seems, based on the fact that there are so many television shows about serial killers, that the audience is absolutely there, so that people are just watching it. They can't get enough of it. I'll put it that way. I don't know if all you guys are telling the truth. I'm seeing some 1s and some 2s. I was thinking everyone's going to.
I'm worried about those 1s, Billy.
Yeah, I thought everyone was going to put a 1 in the chat, but that's okay if you're a 2. But it's just pretty amazing. And as I said, what gave me the idea for tonight's show was going on Netflix and seeing there's that new series on Ed Gein. And then there's about 10 other shows on serial killers on Netflix. And I'm like, wow, is there that much interest that people are just going to be buried? After a while, I get, even coming from my background, I get grossed out and sickened by it. And to me, it's a little bit depressing sometimes to watch the stories of these serial killers. Phil?
Yeah, Billy, there's just such a propensity towards being, interested in this stuff. And as I said earlier, I think it's a matter of, it's a taboo subject and people want to maybe protect themselves from it. But it is very interesting for me as a retired NYPD detective. I love to hear I don't want to hear about the horrible tragedies that take place, but the investigative part, how they uncover who the person is, what evidence they uncover, how they come to arrest a person that's responsible for these things. And I always feel like, and there's that old saying that you learn something new every day. Just from doing the podcast over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been several things that I learned about investigation. And one of them right off the top of my head was with an arson case, that gasoline will leave a certain trace where alcohol will leave much less of a trace with regard to starting a fire. Now, I don't want to encourage any arsonists out there or pyromaniacs to go use alcohol over gasoline, but just to make a point that there's a lot of things that we learn day to day, even though we're experienced investigators, between the three of us over probably 75 years of investigative background and law enforcement background. But there's, the technology just gets better. The DNA technology has just really exploded and taken off. And I think that with the investigative genealogy, the genealogy part of the DNA, you can be 5-7 times removed, which means like third, fourth, and fifth cousins could have gotten a test, the DNA test, to see what their family history was about. And if you leave DNA at a crime scene, they can put it together. So it's really, really amazing. I think it's great. And I just love and very interested in a lot of the investigative part of these serial killer cases.
100%. Mike, it's that time now. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And the subject is fascinating. The idea that someone could lead a double life and be so evil in one hand, but on the other hand, seems so, and for some cases, seems so normal and like an everyday person. That fascination, it's not going to go away. There's nothing wrong with it. But if it's used to educate yourself about people, that's a fantastic thing. So no worries.
Absolutely. Phil, your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Listen, ethically, there are things that we do when we glorify these murderers. We traumatize the families of these victims, and it's an unfortunate part of it. But I think that, educating ourselves on things that take place, and maybe you're able to prevent stuff like that. And sadly, in these cases, we do tend to remember the names of the killers. However, we don't remember the names of the victims. That's just one of the unfortunate things in human nature. And I just think that, again, I said it many times, that for me, it's like a survival instinct, why I'm kind of interested in this stuff too, to perhaps be able to recognize danger and to teach people that they can also recognize danger and what to look out for and what to stay away from. And unfortunately, in society, there's just these psychopaths. So we do need to defend ourselves against them. So it's just one of those things that it is very, very hard to, say, well, I'm interested in this kind of stuff. But it really is fascinating the way that these killers have been captured, caught, and hopefully brought to justice.
Absolutely. Folks, Phil said before that he's learned a lot through doing this show. And I have too, and I always take the position, even though I worked for 10 years as a college professor, I have a great deal of investigative experience, police experience. I believe I'm forever a student, and I'll always be a student. And I think if you take the position in life that you know everything, you're never going to learn anything. So what do they say? Tabula rasa, right?
Yeah.
The blank slate that is waiting to be filled up. I think I learned that in college, tabula rasa, be the blank slate that is always trying to absorb new material, new information. And I hope that in a small way that we teach you guys that do watch this show some information and some things you find interesting and some things that you can maybe even look up because you didn't fully understand everything we were talking about. If we're doing that, then I think we're really doing our job, and I really appreciate what we do. And all you guys that watch this show, thank you so much. Just give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, make comments, share us with your friends and your family. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. On behalf of myself, Professor Mike Geary, Detective Phil Grimaldi, have a great night, everyone, and God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.